Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Now, the Arab League's 165-person mission to Syria came to an end on Thursday amid much condemnation and continuing violence. More than 400 protesters have been killed even while the observers were in the country. And as the team prepares to submit its report to the Arab League in Cairo, the question is now being asked, is it time to increase pressure on Damascus? Zaina Khoda has more.
Syrian opposition groups say the killings in the country have been on the rise, despite the presence of Arab League monitors. They also say thousands of prisoners remain behind bars, despite the authorities agreeing to an Arab League peace plan that calls for their release. For many protesters, the observers might as well go home. The League is to consider the future of the widely criticized mission over the weekend. Human rights groups have been calling for their report to be made public.
First of all, it's very important for the Arab League's credibility. We don't know what they've been doing for a month. What have they seen? What have they done? What criteria? There's been a complete lack of transparency, and this has played into the Syrian authorities' messaging. So I think it's very important for now for the Arab League to show that it's not being manipulated by the Syrian government and that it will report on what it has seen. Secondly, it's very important to deter further violations inside Syria.
Undoubtedly, the mission managed to draw attention to the crisis in Syria. But for those who continue to take to the streets, that hasn't been enough. Opposition leaders are pushing Arab leaders to call for UN action so that safe zones can be created. Russia, however, is seen by the protesters as an enemy that is standing in the way of tougher international action. The opposition also accuses Iran and Lebanon's Hezbollah of providing support to help the Syrian government survive.
The Syrian government still has allies abroad and support inside the country. That is why some people believe the world has been reluctant to intervene militarily. An intervention could lead to the crisis spreading beyond Syria's borders. For now, there is a diplomatic standoff at the United Nations.
And it seems there is a military standoff on the ground as well. Fears are growing that an armed insurgency led by the Free Syrian Army is escalating, that is already overshadowing any peace plan. Zaina Khoda, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Well, the foreign ministers of the Arab League will meet on Sunday in Cairo to discuss their next move, and they have a number of options available. They could call an end to this monitor mission entirely. They could send the monitors back in for another month, or they could decide on something a little more aggressive, as suggested by the Emir of Qatar recently, who floated the possibility of sending peacekeeping troops into Syria to try to calm the situation and to, as he put it, stop the killing. Which of these options are feasible, which are desirable? I'm joined by three guests to discuss the situation today. From Arkansas, Najib Ghadbian is Professor of Political Science at the University of Arkansas. He's also a member of the Syrian National Council, the General Secretariat. In London, Anoushka Kurkjian is a Middle East analyst specializing in the Gulf, Syria and Lebanon. And on the line from Damascus, I'm joined by Bassam Abu Abdullah, who's a political analyst at Damascus University and a former Syrian diplomat. And I'll begin with you, if I could, Bassam Abu Abdullah. From your perspective, let's just look back, first of all, on the month of the Syrian monitoring mission, the Arab League monitoring mission. What do you think happened at that? Was it a worthwhile exercise?
First of all, thank you very much. And I think the commission, they could see a lot of things. For the Arab monetary, let's say, for the Arab observers, I think they came to Syria in an impression that there are millions of people in the streets and the regime tried to kill them because they want freedom and democracy. This is the impression what they came. But when they came to Syria and they were everywhere in Syria and they had a full cooperation from the Syrian government, they could see that this is not the reality and there is a terrorist group, and I think that the observers, they met with different people, different sects in Syria.
So what you're saying is that you think that this monitoring mission report to the Arab League foreign ministers is going to acquit Bashar al-Assad and support his line that the violence is being caused by...
The question here, it's not to support President Bashar. President Bashar, President Bashar, the Syrian people decide what through the election. But the question here is that the reality which should show the report of the Arab Committee should show that we have a terrorist. There is weapons came from Lebanon, from different countries, from Turkey, and they could see that there is a damage in the infrastructure, and there is they killed many people, innocent people.
But do you think that this
many crimes in Syria?
Okay, but
because of that, I think the reality is that which nobody can cover, which nobody can cover what's going on in Syria. It's not the question of democracy and the freedom.
All right, let me stop you there if I could. Let me stop you there and ask you if I could. Are you saying that the monitoring mission will not mention the fact that ordinary civilians are being killed by the troops of the Syrian army?
No, there is. I cannot say that there is. Yes, we had some wrongs in different places in Syria, but it doesn't mean that what I should say. I can see that the problem inside Syria should decide through dialogue, through political solutions.
Right. Well, we're not talking about that as yet. We'll come on to that in a moment. We're not talking about political solutions as the moment. I just want the perspective here of what the monitoring mission. Let me get on to Najib Ghadbian. Let's not for a minute, if we could, talk about the kind of political elements that he was bringing up there. Just tell me, I mean, we've already had a couple of leaks, I suppose, as to what the monitors have to say about the situation. Do you think that what they will come up with will actually add anything to this conversation? And do you think that their mission there will have advanced the situation in Syria at all?
Well, I hope so. First of all, I mean, any kind of mission to Syria to document the atrocities of the regime is welcome. And this is why those of us in the opposition have been calling for independent media and for international observers to be present on the ground. And I'm not going to be like your guest from Damascus and prejudge their report. We're going to see, and you know, we hope that it's going to advance what we know about what's going on in Syria, what we know already, and this has been documented by the findings of the Human Rights Council, by the Human Rights Commissioner at the UN, that there are crimes that account to crimes against humanity. So, and a lot of those have been documented through YouTube, through independent media like yours.
Well, with respect, I mean, you suggest that you don't want to prejudge, but your comments about the atrocities of the regime and how you see the situation are similarly political arguments as were made by Bassam Abu Abdullah. So let me put it to Anoushka Kurkjian. From the perspective of the conversation here, of political expediency, of the potential for finding a solution, did the monitoring mission achieve anything, do you think?
I think it was an important concession by the Syrian regime to allow this monitoring force in. But 165 monitors, and given what a dispersed conflict this is becoming, could only achieve so much. But it was an important concession by the Syrian regime to allow these observers into the country in the first place, and it has achieved some important scrutiny on the conflict. We had one of the observers actually leaving and saying it was a farce. So what exactly do you think the important scrutiny was? I think it has shone in scrutiny on a conflict that for the past 8 months has been absent from the important lens of scrutiny. But I think there has to be much more done to focus on provinces that are outside government control that need much more input from international community. So, Najib Ghadbian, do you think that the monitors should go back in?
I don't think so. Not in the way they were actually conducting themselves. First of all, there was a limited number of observers. We were talking about maximum of 160 at a time. This is for a country of 23 million. So if we are talking about a serious, finding facts mission, we should have thousands of monitors. That's number one. Number two,
is that practical?
A lot of them were not well equipped and trained. Yes, I mean, in areas of, if you want to, and let me, bring you back to what this mission was all about. This mission was to go to Syria and make sure that the regime, in fact, fulfills its obligation under the Arab League initiative, which is to end the killing, pull out its troops, and release political prisoners, so that could lead to some kind of a dialogue. Basically, the killing continued. I mean, more than 600 people were killed while these observers were carrying out their work. So the idea is not to have observers for its own sake, but to verify that the regime is not carrying out any more killing. The regime claimed to release some prisoners, which is true. We heard about hundreds were released, but we know that the numbers of prisoners in Syria are something between 37,000 to 60,000, and a lot of them were transferred to military camps, and those were off limits.
All right, let's put that to Bassam.
So in sum, I think there were a lot of limitations to that mission.
Bassam Abu Abdullah, it does seem as if the Syrian government has not really conformed with the demands of the Arab League. Let's leave the monitors aside for a minute, but all the other demands of the Arab League appear to have been ignored.
There is some important arguments which I should mention. First of all, we will talk about the Arab League. Exactly, especially Qatar, who is trying to push the initiatives one by one. When Syria accepted the protocol with the Arab League, the Syrian government targeted from that to show that what's going on in reality in Syria. It's not only the regime killing the innocent people or the demonstrators in civil or peaceful demonstration. This is now already done, and I think Syria going towards another step, which is very important, the dialogue. And the Arab League should play an important role in that, because otherwise there is no solution for that.
Okay.
The second thing that if we will extend the role of the Commission inside Syria 1 month, and I think this is what the Council of the Ministers will do, because in the Security Council there is no solution for that. The solution, all the solution is between Syrians themselves, and to have dialogue and the new constitution and go to the parliamentary election, which will be decided democratically.
Okay, well, that might be your position, but could I ask you to actually answer the question? And the question was, why is it that the president has not complied with the demands of the Arab League, demands that apparently he said he agreed with?
No, the Commission, the Syrian government, we had a national committee which was in full cooperating with the Commission, and I think the observers, they were in hot places in Syria, and they met with the militants and with the terrorist groups everywhere. And the Reuters, if we can mention it, write a very important report about the terrorists. They have that they are in small groups, and they are attacking many civilian places, and which should recognize not only Reuters, BBC and CNN. So there is argument which should recognize in the Arab League that there is a terrorist group. It's not a peaceful opposition, which was in many of the media in the world that the regime is killing innocent people. This is not the only reality. There is another reality which we should know, and everyone should know. That is,
okay, let me stop you there, please. I'll go to Anoushka Kurkjian. This particular aspect of this conflict is one that very clearly the Syrians continue to want to point out. And they have a point, don't they? I mean, it has been pretty well established that there are armed people within Syria who are firing upon the government, and there is significant evidence of a jihadi element that are contributing to this, isn't there?
I think the conflict is becoming, by and large, much more militarised, and there were pockets of localised resistance, and they're moving more and more towards the epicentre. They're moving closer to Damascus. And that's a danger, that the country will disintegrate into areas that are no-go areas for the government, and it's going to be a slow-motion descent into civil conflict. And the ramifications for that, for the entire region, will be quite devastating. So the focus should be to ensure that there is a political solution, because at the moment there will be no military solution to a conflict that's becoming increasingly dispersed.
But given what we're hearing, the competing narratives on both sides, do you hold any hope that a political solution is even on the table for discussion, let alone a likelihood?
I think if all sides, including the Arab League, don't press for a political solution, then the country looks likely that it's going to disintegrate along sectarian lines, and that's going to be quite a devastating outcome. OK, Najib Ghadbian, don't you think maybe it's time to try to stop the simple shouting of competing narratives from the two sides and begin to lay some sort of framework, some potential arguing points on the table that will lead to a political solution, rather than the attempt simply to shout down the other side?
Well, it's not. We're not talking here about two equally competing, narratives. We are talking about, in the context of this is a peaceful protest movement. It's a continuation of the Arab Spring. These are young people who took into the street demanding freedom, dignity,
you say this is not competing narratives, but you're going directly into the competing narrative, aren't you? There is evidence that there is militarization, there is evidence of jihadi involvement. So you need to acknowledge that to a certain extent.
Actually, I'm going to address that, if you give me a minute. I'm going to address that. But this is the starting point. For 5 months, we have not seen a single firing toward the troops from anyone, from any side. And so here we have governmental forces clearly killing unarmed young men and women.
Well, this is the point. There is
been the case.
Directly competing narrative to what you've just said. Now, if you're suggesting there hasn't been a single civilian or non-government militarized violence in the past 5 months, there are a lot of people who would disagree with you.
No. I will say this. I mean, lately we've seen an increased number of defection in the armed forces. These are men in the army who refused to open fire at demonstrators, and therefore they were executed sometimes on the spot, or they engaged their fellow armed, soldiers, and that's been the kind of counter killing. Lately again, and I'm going to acknowledge that there have been people actually taking up arms to defend themselves and to defend their families. We've seen that increasingly. That's where I think I agree with your point that we need to look into a political solution to this conflict. And the framework of such a solution would go, in my view, through the Security Council. We tried the Arab League, and the Arab League initiative reached its limits. Now, we supported the Arab League. We worked with it. We wanted this to succeed. And that's, I think, for us now, it's the time to go to the Security Council.
Anoushka, can you just comment on what you just heard there? Is this idea of the completely docile Syrian civilian population a credible one?
I think going back to the point of the Security Council, there's still no consensus, certainly among the Russians and the Chinese, of a more robust resolution passing through the Security Council. So for that to happen, there are still a number of steps that need to be taken.
But sorry, you're nipping onto the future there. I just want to address the issue at hand for the moment. So let me put it to Bassam Abu Abdullah. Do you think that perhaps, if, as Anoushka mentioned a moment ago, that we're slipping into a situation of potential civil war, why does the Emir of Qatar's suggestion of a peacekeeping force not make sense?
I think this is a very important point. Emir Qatar, he has no right. He is reflecting the position of the United States, and he has no right because Qatar is not a democratic country, and the Emir of Qatar, he is not objective. His position not objectively towards the Syrian crisis. Qatar has no army. So,
but we're not talking about Qatar here. We're talking about the suggestion of a third-party peacekeeping force.
Okay, what kind of troops? The Syrian army is strong enough, and I think it's not acceptable either. We could hear William Hague, the Minister of Affairs in Britain, in France, and nobody will accept that either inside the Arab League. The only solution that all parties, the Emir Qatar should stop to finance the groups of terrorists and should stop his...
Is there, in your mind, what is the potential diplomatic solution to all of this?
The diplomatic solution that all parties should, including the Arab League, should help to have a dialogue, The democracy can build only through dialogue between all parties, including all kinds of opposition. And I think the
Okay, dialogue in what context?
Openly that he is inviting everyone who wants to build Syria. But through foreign intervention, we had no good experience, not in Iraq, not in Libya, which we can follow up. The only exit, the only solution is through political dialogue, and the Arab League should help Syria in that if they want to solve the crisis.
Najib, what do you think of that?
Well, before you engage in any meaningful dialogue, you should stop the killing. That's the point. And that's why I think the humanitarian situation in Syria is a priority. We're talking again about the regime killing between 30 to 40 people every day. And this is documented by cameras, documented by YouTube, This is why we want, in fact, international observers to go and make sure that stops before we talk about any political solution. That's number one. And number two, there should be certain conditions for such a dialogue to succeed. One of those, again, to release political prisoners, and we're talking about tens of thousands. And I think, thirdly, I don't really believe that it's possible to engage in a dialogue with Bashar al-Assad and his cronies, who are now, in fact, have committed crimes against humanity. I think any political solution should begin by Bashar stepping down, and then we could, in fact, engage in a dialogue with those members of the regime that have not committed atrocities against the Syrian people.
Anoushka, the most immediate situation we're facing is the foreign ministers on Sunday. Now, they're going to hear everything that we've heard and more. What possible future options do they have, and what are the likeliest, do you think?
It seems likely that they're going to extend the mandate at least for another month, because this offers the best possible scrutiny. We don't have much other avenues at the moment, so let's entertain the avenues that we've got. But in the long term, this mission does need to get more muscular. But at the same time, it's an issue of sovereignty. Syrians are very proud people. They don't want to be seen as other regional actors infringing on their sovereignty. And that's an important line that we need to tread. But there has to be scrutiny, as I said, but there has to be a political solution.
Up until now, the international community has seemed very reluctant to take part in this. Are they likely to change their stance?
It seems unlikely that the Russians, at least at the moment, will change their stance because they have lent their support to some extent to the Syrians, and they're unlikely to change that position in the foreseeable future.
Bassam, is there any chance that the government of Bashar al-Assad will agree to some kind of third-party involvement in some context, whatever it may be?
What I want you to comment, Dr. Ghadbian, that to step down President Bashar is very far from you, and the Syrian opposition should stop being a card in the hands of the foreign powers against their people. The Syrian people, they will decide through election if they will believe in democracy, so they should accept the elections with international observers. Otherwise, there is no solution. President Bashar is still the president of the Syrian Arab Republic, and he has popularity, and they know that. Because of that, I think they will go outside of the history if they will continue this kind of dialogue.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. We've run out of time. Thank you all indeed for talking to us. Bassam Abu Abdullah there, talking to us from Damascus. He's at the University of Damascus and a former Syrian diplomat. Najib Ghadbian is Professor of Political Science in Arkansas, and Anoushka Kurkjian, Middle East analyst in London. Thank you all for being with us. And that's it from this edition of Inside Syria. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again at the same time next week. Bye-bye.